The sharp click of my heels on the Baymont courthouse floor sounded like a countdown. To the press, I was just the unstable daughter returning for a payout. But they did not know the truth buried under 19 years of calculated silence. I watched my stepmother smooth her cream skirt, wearing her practiced mask of concern. She thought this was merely a civil dispute over money, but she was wrong. This was the beginning of her end. My name is Erica Swanson, and for the last 15 years, I have lived my life by a simple code. Numbers do not lie, but people always do. I am a forensic accountant, a fraud analyst for the Keystone Verity Group. My job is to look at a spreadsheet that appears perfectly balanced to the naked eye and find the single, hairline fracture where the truth has been bled out. I find the missing millions, the shell companies, the signatures that tremble just a fraction of a millimeter too much. I strip away the narratives that powerful men construct to hide their sins. But today, as I walked through the heavy oak doors of the Baymont Superior Court, I was not just an analyst, I was the girl who fell down the stairs. The air in the courtroom smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that usually calmed me, but today it sat heavy in my lungs. The heels of my black pumps struck the marble floor with a rhythmic, hollow sound that echoed too loudly in the cavernous space. Click, click, click. Each step felt like a countdown. I could feel the heat of 100 gazes burning into the back of my blazer. The room was packed. The gallery was a sea of whispers and shifting fabrics, filled with the curious elite of Baymont and the hungry press corps. I kept my chin high, my eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at the cameras that I knew were zooming in on my face, looking for a twitch, a tear, any sign of the instability they had been reading about in the tabloids all week. To my right, the defense table sat like a fortress, and there he was, Richard Swanson, my father. He looked older than the photos I had seen in the business journals. The legendary real estate king of Baymont, the man who had built half the skyline, was starting to crumble. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His navy suit cost more than my first car, and his posture was rigid, commanding the space around him. Yet, there was a tremor in his hands that he tried to hide by clasping them tightly on the mahogany table. He did not look at me. He stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench, his jaw set in a line of stubborn denial. It hurt more than I expected. Seeing him like that, it was a dull, throbbing ache in my chest, a reminder that the man who should have protected me had chosen, 19 years ago, to protect his image instead. Next to him sat Lizette. My stepmother looked immaculate. Of course she did. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored suit that made her look approachable, maternal, and utterly harmless. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose, elegant chignon. She leaned close to my father, whispering something in his ear, her hand resting gently on his forearm. To the gallery, to the jury pool, to the world, she was the devoted wife supporting her husband through a tragic family scandal. She was the philanthropist who chaired the Baymont Children's Fund. She was the saint who had tried her best to raise a difficult stepdaughter. I watched her profile, the way the corner of her mouth ticked up just slightly as she surveyed the room. It was a look of ownership. She believed she owned this narrative. She believed she had already won because she had spent nearly 2 decades planting the seeds of my insanity. I glanced down at the phone of a reporter sitting in the second row. The screen was bright, the headline bold. Prodigal daughter returns for cash grab. The Swanson saga continues. Another one read, Mental health history at center of Swanson lawsuit. They were painting me exactly as Lizette intended, the erratic, greedy daughter, the one who made things up, the one who broke things. I felt a flash of nausea, hot and acidic, but I swallowed it down. This was why I had stayed away for so long. This was why I had built a life where no one knew who my father was. But you cannot outrun a lie forever. Eventually, you have to turn around and burn it down. You ready for this, Erica? The voice was low, sharp, and grounding. I turned to see Ava Moreno beside me. Ava was a federal prosecutor who did not usually handle civil disputes, but she had taken a special interest in the Swanson file when I brought her the shell company data. She was small, fierce, and terrifyingly competent. She wore a charcoal suit that meant business, and her dark eyes were scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. She knew this wasn't just about a fall down the stairs. She knew that the violence in my past was the foundation for the financial crimes of the present. "I am not sure ready is the word," I whispered back, my hands gripping the edge of the plaintiff's table until my knuckles turned white. "But I am not leaving." "Good," Ava murmured, arranging her files. "Because we are not just here to sue them. We are here to open a door they cannot close. Once the testimony starts, once we get the financials into the record, the criminal investigation becomes inevitable. No backing out now." I nodded, taking a slow breath. No backing out. I forced myself to relax my shoulders. I let my gaze drift past the defense table, past the rows of reporters, to the back of the courtroom. The public seating was full of strangers, but in the very last row, near the heavy double doors, a shadow caught my eye. My breath hitched. It was an old man, thin as a rail, wearing a suit that had been fashionable 30 years ago and was now just weary. He held a fedora in his lap, his fingers working the brim nervously. His hair was entirely white now, and his face was etched with deep lines of regret and time. But I knew those eyes. Miles Avery, the former butler of Swanson Hill Estate, the man who had served my mother tea before she died, the man who had polished the banister I was thrown over, the man who I thought had vanished off the face of the earth, bought off and buried by Lizette's hush money. He looked terrified. He was shrinking into the wooden bench as if he wished to become invisible, but then he looked up. His gaze cut through the chaos of the room and found mine. For a second, the noise of the courtroom faded. It was just me and the old man who had stood at the bottom of the stairs while I bled. Miles gave a single, slow nod. It was a microscopic movement, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. He was here. He had actually come. I felt a sudden stinging in my eyes and blinked rapidly. For 19 years, I had been the only person who knew the truth. For 19 years, it had been my word against theirs, and my word was always hysterical, while theirs was respectable. But Miles was here. He was a ghost returning to haunt the house of Swanson. I looked back at the defense table. Lizette was still smiling her soft, practiced smile at my father. Martin Sloan, their high-priced shark of a lawyer, was shuffling papers and checking his watch. They had no idea. They did not know the ghost was in the room. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice booming off the stone walls. The room shuffled to its feet in a wave of fabric and noise. Judge Carver swept in, black robes flowing. He was a stern man with a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics, which worried me. Lizette's entire existence was theater. Would he see through it? Or would he see a distinguished couple being harassed by an estranged child? "Be seated," Judge Carver said, adjusting his glasses. He looked down at the docket. "We are here for opening statements in Swanson versus Swanson et al. The plaintiff alleges civil battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. There are also related motions regarding the validity of certain estate documents and allegations of elder abuse." The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Elder abuse. That was the charge that made the crowd gasp softly. I saw my father flinch. He hated looking weak. He hated the idea that he could be a victim. Lizette's hand tightened on his arm. Not in comfort, I realized, but in restraint. She was holding him in place. Martin Sloan leaned over to Lizette, covering his mouth with his hand, but he was close enough that I could almost hear the smug vibration of his voice. He looked confident. Why wouldn't he be? He had spent months leaking select parts of my medical history to the press. He had the psychological profile ready to go, a dossier of teenage angst, counseling sessions, and cherry-picked outbursts that painted me as a ticking time bomb. I looked at the defense table and felt a strange sensation. It wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. Flashbacks usually hit me when I was sleeping, or when I heard a loud, sudden noise, but right now, In the silence of the courtroom, the memory washed over me with the violence of a rogue wave. I was 19 again. I was standing in the hallway of the estate, the Persian rug soft under my feet. I could smell Lizette's perfume, expensive gardenias, and something chemical underneath. I could hear her voice, shrill and distorted with rage, screaming that I was ungrateful, that I was trying to ruin her. I could feel the sudden, shocking impact of her hand across my face, the way my head snapped back. And then, the shove, not a slip, not a stumble, a shove, 2 hands on my shoulders, pushing with the intent to hurt. The world tilting, the ceiling spinning, the sickening crunch of my shoulder hitting the oak step, the tumbling, endless fall into darkness. And then, the voice at the bottom. Richard, help! She slipped, I told her not to run. And my father's voice, panicked, weak. Erica, my God, what happened? And the silence, the terrible silence of Miles Avery standing in the shadows, seeing it all, and saying nothing. I shook the memory off, grounding myself in the present, the cool wood of the table under my fingers, the smell of floor wax, the hum of the ventilation system. That was the past. That was the story they had sold to the police, to the doctors, to the neighbors, and eventually, to me. They had gaslit me until I almost believed I was clumsy, until I almost believed I was crazy. But I wasn't 19 anymore. I wasn't the girl crying in a hospital bed while her stepmother told the doctors what to write in the chart. I was Erica Swanson. I took down Ponzi schemes for breakfast. I tracked hidden assets across 3 continents. I knew how to follow the money, and I knew that the money always led to the motive. I looked at Lizette one last time before the proceedings began. She turned, catching my eye. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold, flat and dead like a shark's. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "Go ahead, try." I turned to Ava and nodded. Let them talk about my mental health. Let them bring up the old therapy notes. Let them try to spin the narrative. They were playing a game of reputation and rumor. I was playing a game of evidence. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing alone. Miles was sitting in the back row, clutching his hat like a lifeline. The bailiff called the first motion. The gavel banged. The sound was sharp, final, and satisfying. It sounded like a starting gun. Your Honor, Ava stood up, her voice ringing clear and dangerous through the courtroom. The plaintiff is ready. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale courtroom air. It tasted like battle. Let's begin. The memory did not come back in fragments. It did not drift in like a fog. It crashed into me, complete and terrifyingly high definition, dragging me out of the courtroom and dropping me back into the body of a 19-year-old girl who thought she was invincible. It was late August. The heat in Baymont was sticky and oppressive, hanging over Swanson Hill Estate like a wet wool blanket. I was packing for university. My room a chaos of cardboard boxes and half-folded sweaters. I was leaving. That was the thought that kept me buoyant. I was finally escaping the suffocating orbit of Lizette Swanson. My father had married her 3 years prior, but in that short span, she had managed to scrub the house clean of my mother. It was subtle at first. The heavy velvet drapes my mother loved were replaced with sheer linen. The oil paintings of the coast were swapped for modern abstract pieces that looked like bruised fruit. Lizette called it updating. I called it an erasure. By the time I was 19, I felt like a guest in the home where I had taken my first steps. Lizette had this way of smiling, a tight, closed-lip expression that never reached her eyes. Whenever I walked into a room, she would stop talking mid-sentence, creating a vacuum of silence that made it clear I was an interruption. But that afternoon, the silence was broken by the rustle of paper. I had gone into my father's study to look for my passport. The study was a glass-walled sanctuary on the 2nd floor, overlooking the grand foyer below. It was my favorite room because it was the only place that still smelled like my father. Tobacco, leather, and old ink, but on the desk, sitting atop a pile of correspondence, was a folder marked with the logo of the Eleanor Swanson Scholarship Fund. My mother's fund. It was designed to help underprivileged girls in Baymont go to college. It was her heart, her legacy. I opened it. I expected to see the usual list of applicants. Instead, I saw transfer authorizations, large sums, $50,000 here, $20,000 there, all of it moving out of the scholarship trust and into something called the Swanson Heritage Initiative. I frowned, digging deeper. The Heritage Initiative was Lizette's new pet project, a vague charity that threw lavish galas and funded art awareness. She was draining my mother's legacy to pay for her own vanity. The rage that hit me was white-hot. It wasn't a teenage temper tantrum. It was the righteous indignation of a daughter defending the dead. I grabbed the file, my knuckles turning white, just as the glass door slid open. Lizette stood there. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne and holding a glass of iced tea. She looked cool, composed, and utterly out of place in a room that belonged to my parents. "Erica," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "I do not recall giving you permission to rummage through private financial documents." "This is Mom's fund," I said, my voice shaking not with fear, but with adrenaline. "You are moving the money. You are stealing from the scholarship to fund your parties." Lizette sighed, setting her tea down on a coaster with deliberate precision. She walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. "You are so dramatic, Erica, just like your mother was towards the end. It is not stealing. It is reallocation. The scholarship fund is stagnant. I am putting the capital to better use." "You are rewriting history," I snapped, slamming the folder shut. "You pushed her paintings into the attic. You changed the curtains. Fine, but you do not get to touch her name. I am going to tell Dad. I am showing him this." I turned to leave. That was my mistake. I turned my back on her because I still operated under the naive assumption that there were lines adults did not cross. "You will do no such thing," Lizette said. Her voice had dropped an octave. It was guttural now. I spun back around. "Watch me." The slap came out of nowhere. It was not a movie slap. It was a hard, open-palm strike that connected with the side of my face with the force of a car crash. The sound was a wet crack that echoed off the glass walls. The force of it threw me off balance. I stumbled sideways, my hip catching the sharp corner of the heavy mahogany desk. Pain exploded in my temple where her hand had struck, and a second wave of agony shot up from my hip. My ears rang. A high-pitched whine filled my head, drowning out the hum of the air conditioning. I grabbed the edge of the desk, gasping, trying to right the world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. I looked up at her, my hand cupping my cheek. I expected to see regret. I expected shock. Instead, Lizette looked energized. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wide and bright. She looked at her own hand, then back at me, and her expression hardened into something pure and ugly. "You little brat," she hissed. "You think you can threaten me in my own house?" "I am telling him," I choked out, pushing myself off the desk. I was dizzy, but I was furious. "I am telling him everything." I moved toward the door. The hallway was right there, the safety of the open space. Lizette lunged. She didn't just grab me. She hooked her fingers into the sleeve of my cardigan and yanked. I spun around, my feet tangling in the thick Persian rug. We were grappling now, a messy, desperate struggle near the doorway. I was 19, strong and healthy, but I was in shock. She was fueled by a panic that made her vicious. "Let go of me," I screamed. "You are not ruining this for me," she shrieked back. We spilled out of the office and onto the landing. The grand staircase loomed to my right, a sweeping curve of polished oak that descended into the marble foyer 20 feet below. I pulled my arm free, stumbling back toward the banister. I just wanted space. I just wanted to get away from her crazy eyes. "Lizette, stop," I yelled, raising my hands. She didn't stop. She stepped forward, planting her feet, and placed both hands squarely on my chest. Time seemed to slow down. I saw her manicure. Perfect. French-tipped ovals. I saw the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist catch the light from the chandelier. I saw the intent in her eyes. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip. It was a decision. She shoved. It was a hard, violent push, designed to send me backward. My heels skidded on the polished floor. My center of gravity vanished. I flailed, my hands grasping for the railing, for the wall, for anything, but there was only air. I went over the first step backward. The sensation of falling is terrible because your brain tries to calculate the impact before it happens. I remember the ceiling rotating. I remember the rush of air. And then, the first impact. My shoulder hit the edge of a step with a sickening crunch. The breath left my lungs in a whoosh. I tumbled, limbs flailing, hitting the wood again and again. Hip, elbow, head. Crack. That was my rib. I knew it instantly. Thud. That was my skull bouncing off the riser. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of pain and noise. I rolled, unable to stop, a ragdoll thrown by a furious child. I slid down the last few steps and landed hard on the marble floor of the foyer. For a second, there was absolute silence, no breath, no thought, just the white-hot sensation of having been broken. I lay on my back, staring up at the crystal chandelier that hung miles above me. It was spinning. I tasted copper, blood. It was warm and metallic in my mouth. I tried to inhale, but my chest seized up. Miss Erica. The voice was familiar. It was safe. Miles Avery. He appeared in my field of vision, blocking out the spinning chandelier. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. He dropped the silver tray he had been holding. It clattered onto the marble with a deafening noise that made me flinch. Miss Erica, do not move, he stammered, his hands hovering over me, too afraid to touch in case he made it worse. Oh my God, oh my God. He had seen it. I knew he had seen it. He had been crossing the foyer. He had a direct line of sight to the top of the stairs. I coughed, and pain radiated through my entire torso. Miles, I wheezed. Richard! Lizette's scream tore through the air from the top of the stairs. It was a performance. It was pitch-perfect terror. Richard, help! Oh God! She fell! I tried to turn my head. I saw my father burst out of the library down the hall. He was wearing his reading glasses, looking disheveled and confused. He froze when he saw me on the floor, a broken heap on the cold stone. Erica? He choked out the name. He ran to me, dropping to his knees on the other side of my body, opposite Miles. Erica, baby, look at me. What happened? I looked at him. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say she pushed me. I wanted to scream it. But then Lizette was there. She had run down the stairs, carefully, elegantly, and threw herself onto my father, burying her face in his shoulder. I told her, Lizette sobbed, her voice muffled against his jacket but loud enough for me to hear. I told her not to run in those heels. She was rushing to get her passport and she slipped. Richard, she went right over the edge. No, I whispered. My voice was a wet gurgle. No. Shh, shh, my father said, stroking my hair, his hands trembling violently. Don't try to talk. Honey, an ambulance is coming. Lizette, call 911. I already did, Lizette cried, pulling back to look at me. Her eyes were wet with tears, but behind the water, they were hard as flint. She reached out and took my hand, the hand that wasn't numb. She squeezed. It wasn't a comfort squeeze. It was a vice grip. Her fingernails dug into my palm, sharp and painful. It was a warning. Shut up. I saw her trip, Lizette sobbed, staring straight into my eyes, daring me to contradict her while I lay bleeding. She was so excited about school. She was running, and her heel caught the rug. Oh, my poor girl. I looked at Miles. He was still kneeling there, his face gray. He looked from Lizette to me, and then down at his hands. He was shaking. Miles, I croaked. Tell him. My father looked up at the butler. Miles, did you see it? Did you see her fall? The silence stretched for 1,000 years. I watched Miles Avery. the man who had taught me how to tie my shoes, the man who had been the moral compass of this house. I saw the fear in his eyes. He looked at Lisette, who was still gripping my hand, her knuckles white. He saw the threat radiating off her. He was an old man with no savings, dependent on this job, dependent on her. Miles swallowed hard. His voice was a whisper. I saw her fall. Sir, she came down fast. He didn't lie, technically, but he withheld the truth. He didn't say she was pushed. He just said she fell. My heart broke harder than my ribs. It was an accident, Lisette wailed, cementing the narrative. Just a terrible, terrible accident. By the time the paramedics arrived, the story was set in stone. I was the clumsy teenager. I was the girl who ran in high heels. I was the victim of my own haste. The ride to the hospital was a blur of morphine and sirens. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but every time I woke up, Lisette was there. She rode in the ambulance with me, holding my hand, playing the part of the distraught mother. Every time I tried to open my mouth to speak to the EMT, she would interrupt. She is confused, Lisette told them, brushing hair off my clammy forehead. She hit her head so hard, she doesn't know where she is. At the hospital, it was worse. My father paced the hallway, too distraught to be useful. Lisette took charge. She spoke to the doctors. She filled out the forms. She told them about my history of clumsiness, my anxiety about leaving for college, my tendency to be dramatic. I lay on the gurney, strapped down, a neck brace immobilizing me. I felt like a prisoner in my own body. A doctor shone a light in my eyes. Erica, can you hear me? Do you know what happened? I summoned every ounce of strength I had. She pushed me. The doctor frowned and looked at Lisette. Lisette let out a small, sad sigh. She has been saying that about her friends, about teachers. Whenever she gets hurt or fails a test, it is always someone else's fault. She is very disoriented right now. Doctor. The doctor nodded sympathetically. Head trauma often causes confusion and paranoia. We will order a CT scan. He turned back to his clipboard and wrote it down. I saw the words upside down, but I could read them clearly. Patient, Erica Swanson. Age, 19. Cause of injury, accidental fall. Domestic setting. Patient exhibits signs of concussion and confusion. I closed my eyes as the tears finally leaked out, hot and salty, running into my ears. They weren't tears of pain anymore. They were tears of absolute, crushing defeat. I had not just lost my balance. I had lost my voice. I had lost my father. And as the morphine dragged me down into the dark, I realized I had lost my home. Lisette stood by the bed, stroking my hand. Rest now, Erica, she whispered, her voice low so only I could hear. It is over. You slipped. Remember that. You slipped. The last thing I heard was the scratch of the doctor's pen, signing off on the lie that would define the next decade of my life. The cast on my arm was a heavy, itching reminder of gravity, but the weight of the silence in the house was far suffocating. In the weeks following my fall, Swanson Hill Estate transformed from a home into a theater, and I was the prop that everyone tripped over but refused to acknowledge. I spent most of my recovery in my bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. I heard the clinking of silverware, the hum of the vacuum, and, most painfully, the laughter. Lisette did not cancel her social calendar for my sake. If anything, my injury gave her new material. One evening, about 3 weeks after the incident, they hosted a small dinner party. I was not invited to the table, ostensibly so I could rest, but really so I would not ruin the mood. But my room was directly above the dining hall. The vents in the old house were essentially acoustic pipes, carrying voices straight up to me. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and listened to Lisette rewrite my trauma. Oh, poor Erica. Lisette's voice floated up, light and airy, like she was discussing a puppy that had chewed a slipper. She is just so intense about everything. She was running around in these impossible heels, rushing to get her passport, and she just took a tumble. I told Richard. I said, "That girl moves too fast for her own good." It was terrifying, but you know how teenagers are. No spatial awareness. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the guests. "Is she okay now?" a woman asked. "Physically, yes," Lizette replied, dropping her voice to a confidential, concerned lower register. "But emotionally? She is struggling. She insists, well, it is embarrassing to say, but she insists she was pushed. Can you imagine? In this house, we are just trying to get her the help she needs before she goes off to school, if she goes." I squeezed my eyes shut, my good hand gripping the sheet so hard my fingernails dug into the palm. It was a masterclass in character assassination. She wasn't just calling me a liar. She was painting me as delusional, pitiful, and inherently broken. She took the most violent moment of my life and turned it into a cocktail party anecdote. That was when I realized that breaking my bones was not the goal. It was just the opening move. The goal was to break my credibility. A few days later, my father came into my room. He looked tired. The gray at his temples seemed to have spread, and he carried himself with a slump that was new. He sat on the edge of my bed, avoiding my eyes. "Erica," he started, looking at his hands. "Lizette and I have been talking." "I bet you have," I said. My voice was flat. The pain medication made me feel detached, floating a few inches away from reality. "We are worried about you," he said. "Not just the fall, but your state of mind. You have been aggressive lately, paranoiac." "I am not paranoid, Dad," I said. Sitting up, the movement made my ribs ache. "She is moving Mom's money. She pushed me down the stairs to stop me from telling you. That is not paranoia. That is a sequence of events." Richard sighed, a long, heavy exhalation that smelled of scotch. "See? This is what I mean. You are constructing these narratives. Lizette showed me the scholarship files. Everything is in order. She is just modernizing the portfolio. And the stairs. Erica, honey, Miles was right there. He said you fell." "He said I fell because he is scared of her," I argued, my heart rate climbing. "Dad, look at me. I am your daughter. Why would I lie about this?" "I do not think you are lying on purpose," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were full of pity, which was worse than anger. "I think you believe it happened that way. That is why I think you should see someone. Dr. Arrington. He is a specialist in trauma processing." I stared at him. These were not his words. My father was a man of blueprints and contracts. He did not use phrases like trauma processing. That was Lizette speaking through him. She was ventriloquizing him, putting her soft, poisonous words into his mouth. "I do not need a shrink," I said coldly. "I need you to look at the bank statements." "Enough." He stood up, his face flushing. "I am trying to help you. You are 19 years old. Erica, you are acting like a child who broke a vase and blamed the imaginary friend. You will see Dr. Arrington, or we are going to have a very different conversation about your tuition." He walked out, slamming the door. I sat there in the vibration of the slam, realizing that the father I knew was gone. He had been replaced by this tired, confused man who preferred an easy lie to a hard truth. That night, I stopped crying. I stopped pleading. Instead, a cold, clinical part of my brain woke up. It was the part of me that would later make me an excellent fraud analyst. I realized that I was in a war, and I was losing because I was fighting with emotions while Lizette was fighting with documentation. I started watching her. I noticed that whenever I left my laptop open, browser tabs would be closed or history cleared. I noticed that my phone would be moved slightly on the nightstand while I slept. One afternoon, I walked past the study and saw Lizette at the printer. She was holding a stack of papers, emails I had sent to my friends, ranting about her. But she had a red pen, and she was highlighting specific sentences. Phrases like, "I wish you would disappear," or "I hate this house," were circled. She was curating a file. She was building a paper trail of a volatile, angry stepdaughter to hand to the psychiatrist. I didn't confront her. I went back to my room and started a notebook. August 24th. Lizette accessed my email account. No password change. Likely guessed it. August 26th. Father refused to look at the bank transfers again. Cited stress as the reason. August 28th. Lizette told the neighbors I was on medication for bipolar disorder. I am on ibuprofen. I wrote down everything. It was the only way to keep my own sanity intact, to prove to myself that I was observing reality, not inventing it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in September. I had gone down to the kitchen to get water. It was late, past midnight. The house was dark, but a sliver of light bled out from under the library door. I stopped, holding my breath. I just do not know if it is wise. Richard, Lizette's voice drifted out. It was low, reasonable, terrifyingly calm. If she is this unstable now, imagine what happens when she has access to the trust fund next year. She could hurt herself. She could squander it all on some manic episode. It is her mother's money, Lizette, my father mumbled. He sounded exhausted. It is family money, she corrected him, and we have a duty to protect her from herself. If we adjust the will, just temporarily, create a conservatorship clause, it would only be until she is well again, until she proves she is stable. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cold tile seeping through my socks. Conservatorship. She wasn't just trying to steal the scholarship fund anymore. She was going for everything. She wanted to legally declare me incompetent so she could control my inheritance. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my bruised ribs. I needed an ally. I needed a witness. The next morning, I found Miles in the kitchen. He was polishing silver, his back to me. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched as if he were waiting for a blow. Miles, I whispered. He jumped, nearly dropping a fork. He turned around, and when he saw it was me, his face crumbled. Miss Erica, he said, his voice trembling. I heard you were up and about. You saw her push me, I said. I didn't make it a question. I said it as a fact. You stood there and you watched her put her hands on my chest and shove me backward, and you let my father believe I slipped. Miles looked down at the silver fork in his hands. He began to polish it vigorously, nervously. It is a complicated situation, Mr. Swanson. He loves her. He needs peace. He needs the truth, I hissed, stepping closer. She is trying to take everything, Miles. She is trying to say I am crazy. You are the only one who can stop it. Please, you have known me my whole life. You know I am not clumsy. You know I am not a liar. Miles stopped polishing. He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his old, watery eyes. I am sorry, Miss Erica. I truly am. I have a sick wife in a facility in the city. The bills are astronomical. If I lose this position and... So she bought you, I said, feeling a wave of nausea. She threatened your job. I am sorry, he whispered again. He opened his mouth to say more, perhaps to offer some small piece of information, but then his eyes snapped to the doorway behind me. The fear returned, instant and total. I turned. Lizette was standing in the archway. She was wearing her silk morning robe, looking like a queen surveying her dungeon. Miles, she said. Her voice was ice. The patio needs sweeping, now. Yes, madam, Miles said. He put the silver down and scurried past her, head bowed, without looking at me again. Lizette looked at me. She didn't smile. She just stared. A long, unblinking look that said, I own him. I own this house. And soon, I will own you. Stop bothering the staff, Erica, she said. It makes you look desperate. The explosion happened 2 days later. I went to the bank to withdraw cash from my personal savings account. Money I had earned from summer jobs. I wanted to have an emergency fund. The teller, a woman I had known for years, looked uncomfortable. I am sorry, Erica, she said. Your father moved the account yesterday. He consolidated it into the main family holding. You do not have signatory authority anymore. I drove home in a blind rage. I didn't care about the plan. I didn't care about being calm. I stormed into the living room where Richard was reading the paper. "You stole my money," I screamed. "$3,000 that I earned working at the library. You gave it to her." Richard stood up, throwing the paper down. "I did not give it to anyone. I secured it. You are not in a state to handle finances right now. Erica, you are erratic." "I am erratic because you are gaslighting me," I yelled. "You are letting that woman dismantle my life piece by piece." "That woman is your mother," Richard shouted back. "She is not my mother. She is a thief and a liar." "Richard, please," Lizette said, entering the room with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "She is upset. Do not engage with her when she is like this. It is the episode talking." "Stop calling it an episode." I grabbed a vase from the side table, a hideous modern thing Lizette had bought, and for 1 second, I wanted to throw it. I wanted to smash it against the wall just to hear something break that wasn't me. I caught myself. I saw Lizette's eyes light up. She was waiting for it. She wanted me to throw it. She needed the violence to justify the narrative. I set the vase down. Hard. But I didn't break it. "I am done," I said, my voice shaking. "I am leaving." "Maybe that is best," Richard said. He was breathing hard, his face red. "Maybe you should go. Just for a while. Until you can learn to be respectful. Until you are better." The words hung in the air. My father was kicking me out. He was choosing the peace of his new marriage over the safety of his daughter. "Fine," I said. "But remember this, Dad, when she is done with me, she will come for you, and you will have no one left to believe you." I packed 2 suitcases. I took my clothes, my laptop, and the few photos of my mother that I had managed to hide in my underwear drawer. I walked out of Swanson Hill Estate without saying goodbye. As I drove down the long driveway, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't relief. It was the cold, hard resolve of someone who has just survived an execution attempt. I rented a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Baymont. The next day, I went to the grocery store and saw the local paper. There was no headline, but I heard 2 women talking in the aisle. "Did you hear about the Swanson girl?" one whispered. "Attacked her stepmother. Tried to hit her with a vase. Richard had to kick her out for everyone's safety." "Drug problem, I heard," the other woman replied. "Such a shame. That family does so much for the community." The story was already out. Lizette had been faster than me. She had planted the rumor before my car engine had even cooled. I was the violent, drug-addled daughter. She was the saint who survived me. I stayed in the motel for a week, trying to figure out my next move. I thought about calling Miles. I thought maybe, if I could get him alone, away from the house, he might help me. I called the house line, waiting for him to answer. A strange voice picked up, a new maid. "May I speak to Miles Avery?" I asked. "Oh, Mr. Avery does not work here anymore," the woman said cheerfully. "He retired suddenly last week, moved down south. I think the Mrs. said he wanted to be closer to the ocean." I hung up the phone. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a flatline. He hadn't retired. He had been removed. Lizette had realized he was a loose end, a crack in her armor, and she had sealed it. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was messy, my eyes were shadowed, and I looked exactly like the unstable girl they said I was. But inside, the fire was not going out. It was changing. It was turning into ice. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. Step 1. Survive. Step 2. Learn their game. Step 3. Wait. I did not know it would take 15 years. I did not know I would have to become a stranger to my own name. But as I sat there, I made a promise to the 19-year-old girl in the mirror. I would not be the girl who fell. I would be the woman who pushed back. 15 years is a long time to hold your breath. People tell you that time heals all wounds, but that is a lie. Poor people tell themselves to survive, and rich people tell others to avoid lawsuits. Time does not heal. Time calcifies. It takes the soft, raw tissue of trauma and hardens it into bone, into armor, into something you can use to bludgeon the world back. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of my loft, looking out over the port of Baymont. It was a stark, industrial view. Shipping containers stacked like Lego bricks, cranes cutting through the gray fog, the dark water churning against the docks. It was not the manicured lawns and rose gardens of Swanson Hill Estate. It was real. It was gritty. It was mine. I turned away from the window and caught my reflection in the glass. I was 34 years old now. The soft, frightened girl who had pleaded with her father in a hospital bed was gone. In her place was a woman with sharp angles and expensive tailoring. I ran my thumb over my left temple. The scar was faint now, just a thin, silvery line that disappeared into my hairline, but I felt it every morning. It was my daily reminder. They lied. You survived. I checked my watch. It was 7 a.m. Time to go to work. I was a senior forensic analyst at the Keystone Verity Group. We were the people the government called when the math did not add up, but they could not prove why. We were the people corporations called when they suspected their CFO was buying islands in the Maldives with pension funds. My office was a glass box on the 20th floor of a steel tower downtown. It was sterile, cold, and efficient. I liked it that way. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the file I had been working on for 3 weeks. It was a complex investigation into a network of shell companies suspected of laundering money for an offshore gambling ring. I loved this work. It was my form of revenge. Every time I caught a CEO hiding assets, every time I exposed a fraudulent trust, I was really catching Lisette. I was proving that no matter how many layers of paper you wrapped around a lie, the truth was always there, waiting in the math. Numbers were the only thing in the world that did not gaslight you. I took a sip of black coffee and started scrolling through a ledger from a company called Obsidian Limitata. It was a boring, tedious list of transactions, but my eyes were trained to look for the anomalies, the hiccups. And then, I froze. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Line 412. An incoming transfer of $250,000. The source was not a gambling front. The source was a holding entity called Blue Heron Properties. My heart hammered against my ribs. Blue Heron. It was the name of the lake house where my mother used to take me summers before she died. It was a name I hadn't thought of in nearly 2 decades. I opened a new terminal and ran a query on Blue Heron Properties. The directors were listed as anonymous LLCs registered in Delaware, but I dug deeper. I pulled the tax ID history. I cross-referenced the registered agent. The agent was a man named Marcus Vane. I knew that name. He was Lisette's college roommate's brother, a slimy lawyer who specialized in asset protection. I felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of my neck. I widened the search. I started plugging in other entities connected to Marcus Vane. A pattern emerged on my screens, a spiderweb of transactions that had nothing to do with my gambling case and everything to do with my past. Swanson Holdings, my father's empire, was bleeding. It was a slow, steady hemorrhage. For the past 5 years, assets from the main company were being sold off at below-market rates to these shell companies. A commercial plot in downtown Baymont sold for $2 million when it was worth $10. An apartment complex in the West End transferred for $1. The beneficiary of all these shell companies traced back, through a dozen layers of obfuscation, to a charitable trust, the Lisette Swanson Benevolence Fund. She was gutting him. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing screen. She was doing exactly what she had started 19 years ago with my mother's scholarship fund, but on a massive scale. She was moving the entire Swanson fortune out of my father's name and into hers, leaving him a hollow shell of a king. By the time he died, there would be nothing left to inherit, nothing left to fight over. She would have it all, clean and legal. My phone buzzed. Breaking the trance. It was a notification from a local news app. Richard Swanson announces retirement plans at Charity Gala. I clicked the link. A video popped up. My father stood at a podium. He looked terrible. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and his skin had a gray, papery quality. He looked like a man who was slowly fading away. Standing next to him, radiant in a sapphire gown, was Lisette. She had her hand on his back. a gesture that looked supportive to the audience but possessive to me. "I am proud to announce," my father said, his voice thin and reedy, "that as I step back from the daily operations of Swanson Holdings, we are consolidating our family assets into a new legacy trust. My wife, Lizette, will be the sole executor, ensuring that our vision for the future remains secure." He looked at her as he said it. He looked at her with a mix of adoration and fear. I felt sick. She wasn't just stealing the money. She was stealing his agency. She had isolated him, rewritten his reality just like she had rewritten mine. And now she was getting him to sign his own death warrant on live television. "Package for you, Ms. Swanson." I jumped. The receptionist was standing at my door, holding a thick gray envelope. "Thanks," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. She dropped it on my desk and left. The envelope was plain, no return address, just my name, Erica Swanson, written in block letters. But the handwriting was not blocky, it was shaky, old. I picked up my letter opener. My hands were steady. My hands were always steady, but my stomach was churning. I slit the top of the envelope and dumped the contents onto my desk. It was a stack of photocopies. The paper was old, the grain of the copy machine evident. I recognized the logo at the top immediately. Baymont General Hospital. These were my medical records, the original handwritten charts from 19 years ago. I flipped through them, triage notes, x-ray reports, concussion protocol, and then I stopped at the nursing notes from the first night. There, in blue ink that had been copied into black and white, was a sentence. "Patient is highly agitated, repeatedly states she pushed me and stepmother shoved me." But a thick black line had been drawn through it. Next to the crossed-out line, in different handwriting, sharp, angular handwriting that I would recognize in hell, was a note. "Patient is confused, delirious, disregard outburst, Dr. Arrington." And below that, a signature from the guardian authorizing the redaction, Lizette Swanson. She had edited the medical record. She had literally struck my voice from the official history. My hand trembled as I reached for the last item in the envelope. It was a small, yellowed piece of notebook paper. The writing was spidery. The ink faded. "I saw everything. I saw her hands on you. I saw you fall. I was a coward then. I am dying now, and I cannot meet my Maker with this silence on my soul. It is time. M.A. Miles Avery." I put the paper down. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air in the office was recycled and cool, but I suddenly felt hot. He was alive. For 15 years, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the crazy girl who remembered a crime that everyone else called an accident. But I wasn't alone. Miles had seen it. He had been there. He was the ghost in the machine, and he had just handed me the key to the kingdom. I looked from the medical records to the computer screen where the financial data was still glowing. The two crimes were not separate. They were the same crime. The violence 19 years ago was the necessary precursor to the theft happening today. She had to break me to get me out of the way. She had to discredit me so that when she finally looted the estate, there would be no one credible left to challenge her. It was a long con. A 20-year heist played out in blood and ink. I stood up. I didn't feel fear anymore. I didn't feel the lingering shame of the victim. I felt the cold, hard clarity of the executioner. I grabbed the gray envelope. I grabbed a flash drive and downloaded the spreadsheet detailing the shell companies. I put on my trench coat. "Cancel my meetings," I told the receptionist as I walked past her desk. "For how long?" she asked, surprised. "Indefinitely," I said. I walked out of the building and hailed a cab. "Federal Building," I told the driver. The ride was short. I sat in the back seat, clutching the envelope to my chest. I thought about my father's face on the screen. Weak, defeated. I thought about Lizette's smile. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully erased Erica Swanson, the threat. She thought I was just a damaged woman living in a loft, staying out of her way. She forgot that she hadn't just broken a teenager. She had forged a weapon. I walked into the federal prosecutor's office. It was busy, loud, and chaotic. I walked straight to the reception desk. "I need to see Ava Moreno," I said. The receptionist looked over her glasses. "Ms. Moreno is in trial prep. Do you have an appointment?" "Tell her I have the Swanson file," I said, "and tell her I have a witness." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a cramped office that smelled of stale coffee and high stakes. Ava Moreno walked in. She looked just like her reputation: sharp, tired, and impatient. "You are the forensic accountant," she said, throwing a file on her desk. "You sent me a tip about a shell company last week. What is this about? I do not have time for corporate disputes." I stood up. I placed the gray envelope on her desk. Then I placed the flash drive on top of it. "This is not a corporate dispute," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of the expert witness I had become. "This is a 20-year conspiracy involving fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and attempted murder." Ava stopped moving. She looked at the envelope, then at me. She saw the scar on my temple. She saw the look in my eyes. "Attempted murder?" she asked, her eyebrows raising. 19 years ago, my stepmother pushed me down a flight of stairs to stop me from exposing a theft, I said. She paid off the witnesses. She altered the medical records. She painted me as insane to discredit me. And now, she is doing it again. She is liquidating my father's empire through a network of illegal shell companies, and she is doing it right under your nose. Ava stared at me for a long moment. She was assessing me. She was looking for the crack, the instability, the lie. She didn't find it. "Who is the witness?" she asked. "The butler," I said. "The man who saw me bleed." Ava pulled a chair out and sat down. She opened the gray envelope and slid the medical record out. She read the crossed-out line. She read the note from Miles. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a spark of interest in her dark eyes. It was the look of a hunter catching a scent. "Sit down, Miss Swanson," Ava said. "Start from the beginning, and do not leave anything out." I sat down. "My family is not just cheating me," I said, repeating the words I had practiced in the cab, the words that would start the fire. "They are cheating the system, and I have the receipts." Ava Moreno sat in her office chair, her face unreadable, listening to the digital recording I had extracted from the flash drive. It was a short audio clip, likely recorded on an old tape recorder and digitized later, the static hissing like rain in the background. "I saw it," the voice on the recording said. It was Miles Avery's voice, 15 years younger, trembling with a fear that reached through the speakers and chilled the room. "I saw Mrs. Swanson put her hands on the girl's chest. I saw the push, and I did nothing because I needed the health insurance for Martha. God forgive me." The recording ended with a sharp click. Ava stared at the device for a long moment, then looked up at me. The skepticism that had defined her posture 10 minutes ago was gone. In its place was the sharp, predatory focus of a prosecutor who had just realized she was holding a smoking gun. "That is not just hearsay," Ava said quietly. "That is a declaration against interest, a man admitting to a moral failure to protect a crime. If we can authenticate this, if we can put him on the stand to say these words, Erica, this changes the landscape." "It is not just the assault," I said, leaning forward and pushing the stack of financial spreadsheets toward her. "The assault was just the demolition. This is the robbery." We spent the next 6 hours turning her office into a war room. I walked Ava through the labyrinth I had uncovered. It was a masterclass in corporate theft, hidden beneath the veneer of philanthropy. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a transaction from 12 years ago. Swanson Holdings sold a commercial warehouse in the logistics district to a company called Obsidian Ventures. The sale price was $200,000. Ava frowned, adjusting her glasses. "That is low, even for 12 years ago." "It is not just low, it is practically a gift," I explained. The market value was closer to $4 million. I pulled the incorporation papers for Obsidian Ventures. It was formed 3 days before the sale. The registered agent is a paralegal at the firm that handles Lizette's personal estate planning. So she sells the company assets to herself for pennies on the dollar, Ava murmured, tracing the line on the chart. Draining the equity out of your father's company while he is still technically in charge. Exactly, I said. And look at the dates. Obsidian Ventures was incorporated 2 weeks after my accident. The next shell company, Vermilion Trust, was created a month later, the third one, 6 months later. I laid the timeline out on the desk. The correlation was terrifyingly perfect. The moment I was removed from the house, the moment my instability was established and I was kicked out, the siphoning of assets began. It was as if my presence had been the only dam holding back the flood, and once I was broken, the water rushed in. She waited until I was gone, I said, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. She knew she couldn't do this if I was around asking questions about Mom's scholarship fund. She had to eliminate the witness before she committed the robbery. Ava was typing furiously on her laptop now, pulling up federal databases that I did not have access to. I am looking at the filings for these shell companies. They are sloppy. Erica, they got arrogant. They reused the same P.O. box for 3 different entities in 3 different states. And here, look at this. She spun the laptop around. It was a document filed with the county clerk roughly 10 years ago. A codicil to the last will and testament of Richard Swanson. I have never seen this, I said, scanning the document. It is a public filing, Ava said. It essentially rewrites the inheritance structure. It says that in the event of Richard's death, the majority of the estate bypasses probate and goes directly into the trust controlled by Lizette. But here is the kicker. Read paragraph 4. I read it out loud. Erica Swanson, daughter, shall receive a fixed stipend of $5,000 per month, provided she does not contest the validity of this will or raise any legal claims against the estate or its executors. Any legal action will result in immediate forfeiture of all benefits. It is a gag order disguised as an allowance, Ava said. And look at the bottom. There, next to my father's shaky signature, was my name, Erica Swanson, written in blue ink. I stared at it. The loop of the E, the sharp cross of the T in my last name. It was my signature. It was undeniably my signature. I never signed this, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I haven't spoken to my father about money in 15 years. I was not even in the state when this was dated. It looks authentic, Ava noted, playing devil's advocate. If a handwriting expert looks at this, they will say it is a match. It is too much of a match, I said. The forensic analyst part of my brain kicked into gear. Ava, do you have a scanner? Yes. Scan it. High resolution. While she scanned the document, I pulled up my secure cloud storage. I dug through my old files. Tax returns, college applications, lease agreements. I found a lease I had signed for my first apartment, dated around the same time as the will. I opened both images in my analysis software. I made the will signature red and the lease signature blue. Then, I dragged them over each other. They lined up perfectly, every curve, every pixel, every dot of ink. See that? I pointed at the screen. That is impossible. No human signs their name exactly the same way twice. There is always natural variance, a slight difference in pressure, angle, or spacing. If 2 signatures are geometrically identical, one of them is a forgery. It is a digital lift. Ava leaned in, her eyes widening. They scanned your signature from an old document and pasted it onto the will. And they printed it out to make it look like an original wet signature, I finished. This is a federal crime. Wire fraud, forgery. Ava sat back, exhaling a long breath. Okay, we have the motive. We have the method. Now let's look at the cover-up. She turned back to her computer and started following the money trail from Lizette's charity. The Swanson Benevolence Fund. You said Lizette used her charity to buy influence, Ava said. Let's see who she was buying. She pulled up the charity's 990 tax forms. The list of grants was long and boring. Museums, opera houses, animal shelters. But then, Ava paused. Harborview Wellness Center, she read. Received a grant of $50,000 in 2010, another $50,000 in 2011. Harborview, I repeated. The name tasted like bile. That is Dr. Arrington's clinic, the psychiatrist my father forced me to see. Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard. Let's see if there is a quid pro quo. She accessed a different database, likely a subpoenaed cache from a previous insurance investigation. She searched for my name. Here it is, Ava said, her voice grim. A psychological evaluation report dated 2 weeks after the first donation was cleared. She opened the file. I read the clinical language that had been used to shackle me for half my life. Patient demonstrates signs of histrionic personality disorder, tendency to confabulate events to garner sympathy, violent outbursts when confronted with reality. Recommendation: separation from family triggers and limited access to financial resources to prevent impulsive behavior. They bought it, I said, feeling a fresh wave of anger hot enough to melt steel. She donated $50,000 of my mother's money to a clinic, and in exchange, they wrote a report saying I was crazy. That report is the legal justification for everything. It is why the judge granted the will changes. It is why the police never investigated my claims. It is the foundation of the lie. It is a RICO case, Ava said, using the term for racketeering. It is an organized enterprise. The lawyer, the doctor, the charity board, they are all part of the machine. Ava stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a dusty, unlabeled box. I did some digging before you got here, she said. When you first mentioned the abuse, I ran a search through the old Child Protective Services logs and the local precinct's discard pile, things that were flagged but never acted upon. She pulled out a single, wrinkled sheet of paper. This was filed anonymously 15 years ago, Ava said, handing it to me. A report of screaming and sounds of physical altercation at Swanson Hill Estate. The reporting party claimed to be a delivery driver who heard a young woman begging for help. I looked at the paper. It was dated 3 days before I was kicked out of the house. Why wasn't this investigated? I asked. Look at the signature of the intake officer who marked it as unsubstantiated prank call, Ava said. I read the name, Karen Miller. Karen Miller, I said, connecting the dots instantly. She is the treasurer of the Swanson Benevolence Fund. She and Lizette play tennis every Tuesday. Karen Miller was a volunteer at the crisis hotline back then. Ava explained. She intercepted the report. She buried it, and a few years later, she ended up on the board of $1 million charity. I let the paper fall to the desk. The scope of it was suffocating. It wasn't just a wicked stepmother. It was a web, a network of favors and payouts that insulated Lizette from accountability. She had weaponized the entire social structure of Baymont against me. Ava looked at me, her expression serious. Listen to me, Erica. We have a lot here. We have forgery. We have financial fraud. We have a pattern of corruption. I can open a preliminary federal investigation today. I can freeze assets. I can subpoena records. Do it, I said. But, Ava held up a hand. You need to understand the reality of court. Documents are boring. Juries get lost in shell companies and pixel variances. Martin Sloan, their lawyer, is a shark. He will say the signature is a glitch. He will say Dr. Arrington's opinion was valid. He will say the shell companies were just bad business investments, not fraud. She leaned across the desk, locking eyes with me. We have a paper trail, she said. But paper trails do not send people like Lizette Swanson to prison. Witnesses do. If we want to win this, if we want to destroy the lie once and for all, we need a human being to stand in front of a jury and say, I watched her do it. She pointed to the digital recorder. This tape is good for probable cause, Ava said. But it is not admissible in a trial without him. The defense will claim it is a deepfake, or that he was coerced. We need Miles Avery in that courtroom, flesh and blood. I nodded slowly. I understood. The math was perfect, but the math wasn't enough. We needed the emotion. We needed the ghost. I will find him, I said. He is off the grid, Ava warned. The address on the envelope was a dead drop. He does not want to be found. He sent me the package, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. He wants to be found. He is just scared, but he kept that video for 19 years. He kept the truth. He is waiting for someone to come and tell him it is safe to speak. I picked up the flash drive. Start the subpoenas, Ava, I said. Freeze the accounts. Make them panic. I am going to get the one thing money couldn't buy. And what is that? Ava asked. A conscience, I said. I walked out of the federal building into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. The city looked different now. It wasn't a fortress I was trying to storm. It was a puzzle I had finally solved. I knew where the pieces were. I knew who the players were. And I knew exactly where to start looking for an old butler who loved the ocean and carried a heavy burden. The hunt for Miles Avery was on, and this time, I wasn't the prey. The clues in the gray envelope led me 200 miles north, away from the city and into the damp, salt-sprayed desolation of a town called Harbor's Edge. It was the kind of place people went when they wanted to fall off the map. The main street was lined with shuttered storefronts, and the air smelled of brine and rotting kelp. I pulled my rental car into the gravel lot of the Sea Glass Motel. The neon sign buzzed with a dying electrical hum, the M flickering on and off like a nervous tick. It was a single-story strip of peeling blue paint and rusted railings. I checked the paper Miles had sent me. The return address on the envelope was a P.O. box in the town center, but the postmark led me here. I had cross-referenced the handwriting on the note with local property tax records for small businesses. A man named Arthur Vane had been managing this motel for the last 12 years. I walked into the front office. A bell chimed overhead. Tinny and cheap. Behind the counter, an old man was sorting through a stack of receipts. He wore a faded cardigan that hung loosely on his frame, and his white hair was thin, revealing a scalp spotted with age. He did not look up immediately. "We have vacancies," he said, his voice rough with disuse. $40 a night, cash preferred. "Hello, Miles," I said. The man froze. His hand stopped in midair over the receipt book. For a long, terrible 10 seconds, he did not move. Then, slowly, painfully, he raised his head. Time had been cruel to Miles Avery. The crisp, upright posture of the Swanson Hill butler was gone, replaced by a concave slump. His face was gaunt, the cheekbones protruding sharply under papery skin, but the eyes were the same. They were the same pale, watery blue eyes that had looked down at me as I lay broken on the marble floor 19 years ago. "I go by Arthur now," he whispered. It was a plea, not a correction. "I know," I said, stepping closer to the counter. "But I am not looking for Arthur. I am looking for the man who watched me fall." Miles flinched as if I had struck him. He looked toward the door, checking for imaginary eavesdroppers. "You should not be here, Miss Erica. Please, go away." "I cannot do that," I said softly. "You sent me the file, Miles. You sent me the note. You invited me." "That was a mistake," he stammered, his hands shaking as he gathered the receipts into a messy pile. "A moment of weakness. I am an old man. I am dying. The doctor says I have 6 months. I wanted to clear my conscience, but I cannot testify. I cannot go back there." "Why not?" I asked. "Because she will destroy me," Miles hissed. The fear in his voice was visceral. It wasn't the fear of a man afraid of prison. It was the fear of a man afraid of something far worse. "You do not know what she is capable of, Miss Erica. You were just a child. She has reach. She has power." "She has nothing but stolen money and lies," I countered, leaning my hands on the counter. "And she is doing it again, Miles. She is draining my father dry. She forged a will. She is going to leave him with nothing, just like she tried to do to me." Miles looked down at his hands. "Richard, is he well?" "He is a shell," I said brutally. "He is sick, he is confused, and he is signing away his life because he trusts her, just like he trusted her when she told him I slipped." Miles closed his eyes, a tear leaking out and tracking through the deep ravine of a wrinkle on his cheek. "I saw it," he whispered. The confession hung in the salty air between us. "I was coming from the dining room. I saw you arguing. I saw her grab your arm, and I saw her shove you. It wasn't a stumble. She put her weight into it." "Why didn't you speak?" I asked, the question I had carried for 19 years. "I looked at you, Miles. I begged you." He opened his eyes, and the shame in them was bottomless. "Because she got to me first, before the ambulance even left the driveway. She pulled me into the pantry. She had an envelope, $10,000 cash, and a document." "A non-disclosure agreement?" I guessed. "Worse," Miles said. His voice dropped so low I had to lean in to hear him. "She had a statement, typed up and ready. It was a statement from a former maid, a girl named Sarah, who had been fired for theft a month prior. The statement claimed I had touched her inappropriately." My blood ran cold. "It was a lie," Miles said, his voice shaking with indignation and old terror. "I never touched anyone. I have never. But Lizette said if I told the police what I saw on the stairs, she would give that statement to the press. She would ruin me. I would never work again. I would be a pariah. I had a wife in a nursing home. Miss Erica, I needed the job. I needed the pension. I was a coward." I looked at this broken man. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at him for trading my life for his reputation. But looking at him, I only felt a profound sadness. Lizette hadn't just victimized me. She had held a gun to the head of everyone around her. "She weaponized your decency against you," I said. "She is a monster," Miles agreed. "Then help me kill the monster," I said. "Come back to Baymont. Testify." "I cannot," he said, shaking his head vigorously. "It is my word against hers. She will bring up the Sarah accusations. She will drag my name through the mud even now." "No," I said firmly. "She won't, because we have the forensic evidence now. We have the paper trail, but we need the narrative. We need you to tell the jury why you stayed silent." "It is not enough," Miles muttered. He reached under the counter, fumbling with a latch. "My word is not enough. That is why I kept this." He pulled out a small cardboard box. Inside, nestled in foam, was a thick black object. It was a Motorola Razr, a relic from the early 2000s. "I charged it up yesterday," Miles said. "I have kept it charged for 19 years, just in case." He flipped the phone open and pressed a few buttons. The screen was tiny and pixelated, but the audio was surprisingly clear. He handed it to me. On the screen, a grainy video played. The angle was low, obscured by what looked like a plant leaf. Miles must have set the phone down on a table in the hospital hallway to record surreptitiously. In the video, my father was sitting on a bench, head in his hands. Lizette was pacing back and forth. She looked impeccable, even in the fluorescent hospital light. "You have to be firm, Richard," Lizette's voice cut through the speaker, sharp and commanding. "The doctors are asking too many questions. If they think there is a domestic dispute, they bring in social services. Do you want that? Do you want the scandal?" "She said you pushed her, Lizette." My father's voice was muffled. "She was so sure." "She is concussed," Lizette snapped. She stopped pacing and grabbed my father's shoulders. "She is confused and she hates me. Listen to me. We stick to the truth. She was running. She slipped. We are a loving family. If you let her spread these lies, she will destroy your reputation. Do you hear me? You tell the doctor it was an accident, or I walk out of here and I take the investors with me." The video ended. I stared at the phone. My hands were trembling. This wasn't just proof of the lie. It was proof of the coercion. It showed Lizette actively scripting the cover-up, manipulating my father's fear of scandal to silence him, and threatening his business if he didn't comply. "This changes everything," I said, looking up at Miles. "This proves she interfered with a medical diagnosis. It proves witness tampering. Ava Moreno, the prosecutor, she said intent is the hardest thing to prove. This is intent." Miles reached into the box again. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked and peeling. "I was the invisible man," Miles said quietly. "Servants always are. People say things in front of us because they forget we have ears." He opened the notebook. The pages were yellowed, covered in neat, cursive handwriting. "I wrote down things she said on the phone," Miles said. "Dates, times." He pointed to an entry dated 6 months before my fall. February 12th. Mrs. D. Swanson on phone with lawyer, quote, "The prenup is tight, but if he is incapacitated, I get power of attorney. We need to start moving the liquid assets into the foundation. If the daughter gets in the way, we declare her incompetent. It is easier than a custody battle." I read the words, and a chill went down my spine. It was premeditated. The fall wasn't a crime of passion. It was a strategic move on a chessboard she had been setting up for months. "She planned it," I whispered. "She didn't just snap. She planned to remove me." "She hated you," Miles said, "because you were the only one who actually looked at the books. You were the only one smart enough to see the theft." I closed the notebook. I looked at Miles Avery, the man who had been haunting my periphery for 15 years. "Miles," I said, "this notebook, this video, they are powerful, but they are just objects. The jury needs to see the man who wrote them. They need to see your fear. They need to see your regret. If you stay here, you die in the shadows, and she wins. If you come with me, you might get hurt. Yes, but you will clear your soul." Miles looked around the dingy motel office. He looked at the rain streaking the window. He looked at the life of hiding he had built for himself. Then, he took a deep, rattling breath. He reached under the counter and pulled out a set of keys. He placed them on the formica surface with a metallic click. "I am tired of running, Miss Erica," he said. He walked around the counter. He seemed taller now, as if the act of deciding had straightened his spine. He picked up his coat and his fedora from the rack by the door. "I will lock up," he said. "I do not think I will be coming back." We walked out to the car in silence. The wind was whipping off the ocean, cold and biting. But Miles didn't shiver. He got into the passenger seat of my rental car and placed the box with the phone on his lap, holding it with both hands like a holy relic. I started the engine. "Miles," I said, before I put the car in gear. "Thank you." He looked at me, and a sad smile touched his lips. "I remember that day," he said softly. "I remember you lying on the parquet floor. You looked so small, and I remember looking into your eyes and turning away." He took a breath, and his voice found a strength I hadn't heard yet. "I will not turn away this time," he said. "I will stand in that box, and I will point my finger at her, and I will say, 'I saw it.'" I put the car in drive and pulled out of the Sea Glass Motel. We headed south, toward Baymont, toward the storm that was waiting for us. I wasn't just bringing a witness, I was bringing the past, and it was ready to scream. The whispers started circulating in the high-ceilinged dining rooms of the Baymont Country Club before I even filed the first official motion. In a town like this, money talks, but old money gossips. People were saying that Richard Swanson's estranged daughter was back, and she was asking questions that made the Swanson legal team sweat. I was sitting in my loft, reviewing the subpoena list with Ava over a secure video call, when my phone buzzed. It was a text message. The sender ID said Dad. I stared at the screen. My father had not sent me a text message in 6 years. Our communication, what little there was of it, was filtered through secretaries and lawyers. "Erica, I want to talk. Just us. No lawyers. I think we can fix this. Meet me at the Meridian Lake Lodge, tonight at 8. I read it 3 times. The syntax was off. My father was a man of formal grammar. Even in casual conversation, he did not use short, choppy sentences. He did not say, "Fix this." He would have said, "Resolve this matter." "What is it?" Ava asked, noticing my expression shift on the camera. I read the text out loud. "It is a trap," Ava said immediately. "Do not go." "I have to go," I said, grabbing my keys. "If there is even a 1% chance that he is waking up, That he is reaching out to me because he found out about the trust fund theft. I have to take it. And if it is not him? Ava asked. Then I need to see who is pulling the strings, I replied. An hour later, I was standing in the parking lot of a gas station 5 miles from the lodge. Ava was taping a small, high-frequency microphone to the underside of my collar. 2 federal agents sat in a black sedan nearby, their faces illuminated by the glow of their surveillance equipment. If she touches you, Ava said, checking the audio levels on her receiver, if she even raises her voice in a way I do not like, we are coming in. This is not a negotiation. Erica, this is a tactical operation. You get them to admit something on tape, and you get out. I understand, I said. I buttoned my coat, hiding the wire. The drive to Meridian Lake Lodge was a journey into isolation. The lodge was a private retreat the family had owned for decades, nestled deep in the pines overlooking the dark, glass-like surface of the lake. The road was a series of switchbacks, steep and narrow, with a sheer drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. I pulled my car up the gravel driveway. The lodge was dark, save for a warm, inviting glow coming from the main living room. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. It looked like a postcard of a happy family vacation. I walked up the timber steps and knocked on the heavy oak door. I expected my father. I expected to see him looking tired, perhaps holding a drink, ready to apologize. The door opened. Lisette stood there. She was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal and dark trousers. She held a glass of red wine in one hand. Her smile was sad, weary, and perfectly rehearsed. "Hello, Erica," she said softly. "Come in out of the cold." I stepped inside. The air smelled of cedar and expensive potpourri. I looked around the expansive living room. "Where is Dad?" "Richard is upstairs resting," Lisette said, closing the door behind me. The latch clicked with a heavy, final sound. "He has had a migraine all day. The stress, it is very hard on him." "He texted me," I said, keeping my hand near my pocket. "I sent the text," Lisette admitted without missing a beat. She walked over to the coffee table and set her wine down. "If I had invited you, you would not have come, and we really do need to speak. Erica, mother to daughter." "You are not my mother," I said coldly, "and I am not sure what we have to talk about without a court reporter present." "Sit down, please." She gestured to the leather armchair opposite her. On the table between us sat a thick manila folder. I sat on the edge of the chair, keeping my back straight. "I am listening." Lisette sat down and crossed her legs elegantly. She tapped a manicured fingernail on the folder. "This has gone far enough. Erica, the tabloids, the rumors, it is hurting the business. It is hurting your father. I know you are angry. I know you feel displaced, but dragging this family through the mud will not bring your mother back." "This is not about my mother," I said. "This is about the $20 million you siphoned out of Swanson Holdings into shell companies registered to your divorce lawyer's brother." Lisette's eyes tightened, just for a fraction of a second. "Creative accounting is not a crime, Erica. It is estate planning. But I am not here to argue finances with you. I am here to offer you an olive branch." She pushed the folder across the table. "Open it," she said. I opened the folder. Inside was a legal settlement agreement. I scanned the numbers. $5 million, I read. Tax-free, lump sum. "And the deed to the townhouse in Georgetown," Lisette added smoothly. "It is a beautiful property. You could start fresh. Get away from this grim little life you have built here investigating people." "In exchange for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You drop the lawsuit." Lisette listed on her fingers. "You sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding all family matters, past and present, and you publicly retract your statements about the incident when you were 19. I looked at the papers. $5 million. It was enough money to disappear. It was enough money to never work again. "And if I say no?" I asked, closing the folder. Lisette took a sip of wine. Her face changed. The sad stepmother mask dissolved, revealing the predator underneath. "Then I release this," she said. She reached behind a cushion and pulled out a second, thinner file. She tossed it onto the table. It was a photocopy of a handwritten page. My handwriting. I felt a jolt of violation. It was a page from my diary, my private journal from when I was 18 years old. I had thought it was lost in the move. "I hate him so much sometimes," Lizette read aloud, her voice mocking. "I wish the house would just burn down with everyone in it." She looked up at me. "You wrote that 3 days before the accident. Imagine how that looks to a jury. Erica, an unstable, angry teenager fantasizing about arson and death. We have the full journals. We have the therapy notes. If you push this to trial, I will paint you as a disturbed, violent woman who has been stalking her family for decades. I will destroy your credibility. I will destroy your career. You will be the crazy Swanson girl forever." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. The wire on my collar felt hot against my skin. "You stole my journals," I said quietly. "You broke into my room." "I protected the family," she corrected. "So, what will it be? $5 million and a fresh start? Or total mutual destruction?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had shoved me down a flight of stairs and then held my hand in the ambulance while lying to the doctors. She was so confident. She thought she held all the cards because she thought the past was dead. I stood up. "I do not want your money, Lizette," I said. "Don't be stupid," she hissed. "You have nothing. You have no proof. It is your word against the pillars of the community." "It is not just my word," I said. I leaned over the table, looking directly into her eyes. "I found him." Lizette frowned. "Found who?" "Miles Avery," I said. The reaction was instantaneous. The color drained from Lizette's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. Her hand jerked, knocking the wine glass over. Red wine spilled across the settlement papers like blood. He is gone," she stammered. "He retired." "He is alive," I said, my voice hard and clear. "And he is not the scared butler you paid off 19 years ago. He is in Baymont. He has spoken to the federal prosecutor, and he told us everything, the bribe, the threats, the push." Lizette stood up, her hands trembling. "You are lying. Miles would never—" "He kept the video, Lizette," I lied. "Partially. He had the hospital video, not the push, but she didn't know that. He kept everything." Lizette stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The veneer of the socialite was gone. She looked like a cornered animal. "You ungrateful little wretch," she spat. "I gave you a way out. I gave you a chance to walk away rich." "I do not want to be rich," I said, turning toward the door. "I want to be believed." "You will regret this," she screamed after me. Her voice echoed off the wooden beams, shrill and desperate. "Do you hear me, Erica? You are making a mistake. You are not walking away from this." I didn't look back. I walked out into the cold night air, my heart racing. "Did you get that?" I whispered into my collar as I reached the car. "We got it." Ava's voice crackled in my ear, sounding tense. "She threatened you. She admitted to the bribery by implication. Get out of there, Erica, now." I do not like how she sounded. I got into my car and locked the doors. I started the engine and threw it into reverse, spinning gravel as I backed out. I just wanted to get off the mountain. I drove fast, too fast. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisting road ahead. The pines were a blur of black and green. I hit the first switchback, tapping the brakes. The car slowed responsively. I exhaled. I was safe. I was leaving. We had Miles. We had the tape. We had her panic. I accelerated down the straightaway that led to the steepest part of the descent, a sharp curve that hugged the cliffside overlooking the ravine. I saw the curve coming up. I lifted my foot off the gas and pressed the brake pedal. The pedal went to the floor. There was no resistance, no friction, just a soft, sickening squish of metal hitting the floor mat. My stomach dropped. I pumped the pedal. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The car was gaining speed. gravity pulling it down the mountain like a stone. "Ava!" I screamed, grabbing the steering wheel with both hands. "The brakes! They are not working!" "What?" Ava's voice screamed back in my ear. "Erica, pull the emergency brake. Shift to low gear." I yanked the handbrake. There was a loud snap, and the lever pulled up uselessly in my hand. The cable had been cut. I was doing 60 miles an hour now. The curve was approaching fast. A concrete barrier separated the road from a 50-foot drop into the rocky shoreline of the lake. If I tried to take the turn at this speed, I would flip. If I went straight, I would go over the edge. "Hang on," I yelled. I had a split-second choice. To the right was the cliff. To the left was a dense thicket of trees and a rising embankment. I wrenched the steering wheel hard to the left. The tires screamed. The car fishtailed, skidding sideways across the asphalt. I braced myself, crossing my arms over my chest. The car hit the embankment. The impact was deafening. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and the world spun violently. The car rolled. Once, twice, the roof caving in with a terrifying groan. I felt the seatbelt biting into my collarbone, snapping a rib. Then, silence. I was hanging upside down. The smell of gasoline and hot rubber filled the cabin. My head was throbbing, warm blood trickling into my eye. "Erica? Erica, talk to me." Ava's voice was tinny, coming from the earpiece that had been knocked loose but was dangling near my face. I coughed, and pain flared in my chest. "I am alive." "We are 2 minutes out," Ava shouted. "Stay still. Do not move." I closed my eyes, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. It wasn't an accident. The fluid pedal, the snapped cable. Lizette knew I was coming. She had baited the trap. She didn't just want to buy my silence. She wanted to ensure it. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. 2 days later, I sat in a hospital bed, my arm in a sling and a bandage wrapped around my head. Ava stood at the foot of the bed, holding a clipboard. Her face was grim. "The preliminary report from the mechanic came back," she said. "The brake lines were not just cut, they were loosened at the caliper. It was designed to hold for a few miles of light braking and then fail completely under pressure, like on a steep downhill." "And the handbrake?" I asked. "Files through the cable," she confirmed. "Who did it?" "The car was serviced yesterday at Baymont Auto," Ava said. "We ran the ownership. It is a subsidiary of a company called Apex Logistics, one of the shell companies in your spreadsheet. Lizette owns the garage." I looked out the window at the gray sky. "She tried to kill me," I said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Ava said. "And by doing that, she just handed us the final nail in her coffin. This is no longer a white-collar crime. Erica, we are upgrading the charges. Attempted murder, conspiracy." I touched the fresh bandage on my temple, right next to the old scar. "She missed," I whispered. "She missed," Ava agreed. "And now, we are not going to—" The crash did not break me. It calcified me. I spent 3 days in the hospital, watching the bruising on my ribs turn from purple to a sickly yellow, but my mind had never been clearer. The attempt on my life had stripped away the last vestiges of hesitation. Lizette had made a tactical error. She had assumed that fear would silence me, but she had forgotten the most basic rule of physics: pressure creates diamonds, and I was ready to cut glass. Ava Moreno did not waste a second. She stood by my hospital bed, her phone glued to her ear, orchestrating a federal storm. The jurisdiction had shifted. We were no longer looking at a civil dispute over an inheritance. We were looking at a multi-state conspiracy involving wire fraud, identity theft, and the attempted murder of a federal witness. "We are upgrading the investigation," Ava told me as I was discharged, her eyes dark with lack of sleep. "We are looking at elder abuse. Erica, we have reason to believe Richard is not just a passive participant. He is a hostage." The first crack in the wall came from inside the fortress. A woman named Sarah Jenkins, a private nurse who had been hired to care for my father after his minor stroke last year, contacted Ava's office through an encrypted channel. We met her in a diner 3 towns over. far away from the prying eyes of Baymont's elite. Sarah was a nervous woman, twisting a paper napkin until it shredded in her hands. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement," she whispered, looking at the door. "Mrs. Swanson made everyone sign one, but I cannot sleep at night." "Tell us about the signing of documents," Ava said gently, her pen poised over a legal pad. "She never lets him read them," Sarah said. "Mr. Swanson has bad eyesight now, cataracts that he hasn't had surgery for yet. Whenever a contract or a bank transfer comes in, Mrs. Swanson holds it. She says, 'Oh, Richard, do not strain your eyes. It is just the standard renewal for the insurance.' Or, 'It is just a tax form.' She guides his hand to the signature line. Sometimes she even holds the pen with him to steady his tremor." I felt a surge of nausea. My father, the titan of industry who used to read 50-page contracts over breakfast, was being treated like a puppet. "Does he ever object?" I asked. "Sometimes," Sarah said. "He asks to see the pages, but she just laughs. She touches his cheek and says, 'You get so tired. Darling, let me handle the boring parts.' And then she gives him his medication, and he falls asleep within 20 minutes. "The medication," Ava noted, "is it prescribed?" "It is," Sarah nodded, "but she controls the dosage, and since she took over, he is always foggy, always pliable. We had the abuse. Now we needed the original intent." I tracked down Elena Moore. She had been my mother's best friend in law school, a brilliant woman who had eventually left corporate law to teach ethics at the state university. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. I found her in her office, surrounded by towers of books. When she saw me, she didn't say a word. She just walked around her desk and hugged me, holding me tight enough to hurt my bruised ribs, but I didn't flinch. "You look just like her," Elena said, pulling back to look at my face. "Except for the eyes. You have Richard's eyes, the eyes he used to have before he went blind to the world." I told her everything. I told her about the shell companies, the forged will, the crash. Elena went to a filing cabinet in the corner. "I knew this day would come. I told your mother to file this officially, but she was so superstitious. She didn't want to think about dying." She pulled out a file folder. Inside was a draft, a handwritten outline of a will my mother had been working on just months before the cancer took her. "Read paragraph 3, Elena said. I read the familiar, looping script of my mother. "Regardless of the marital status of my husband, Richard, 50% of my personal estate and 30% of the joint holdings shall always be held in trust for our daughter, Erica. This is to ensure her independence, no matter who sits at the table after I'm gone." "It was never signed," Elena said softly. "It has no legal standing as a testament, but as evidence of intent, as proof that the current arrangement violates the spirit of the original family trust, it is powerful, Erica. It shows that your exclusion was not an oversight, it was a reversal." "It proves Lizette undid her wishes," I said, tracing my mother's handwriting. "She didn't just take the money, she erased my mother's voice." The evidence was mounting, but we needed something visceral, something that would make a jury hate her. That came from Donna Green. Donna had been the housekeeper at Swanson Hill for 6 years before being fired for insubordination. She met me at my loft, carrying a USB drive like it was a grenade. "She drinks," Donna said bluntly. "She hides it well in public, but at home, after your father goes to sleep, she drinks vodka, and she talks to the dog, or she talks to the air." Donna plugged the drive into my laptop. "I recorded this about 4 years ago. I was cleaning the hallway, and she was in the library. She was loud." I clicked play. Lizette's voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and arrogance. "They think they are so smart. The board, the lawyers, they do not know I hold the pen. Just a little tweak, a little scan, and the brat gets 0. 0, not a dime for the princess. I earned this house. I put up with his stories, his boring, endless stories. I earned every brick." There was the sound of glass shattering on the recording, then a laugh. "Let her sue. Let her try. I own the judge. I own the town. Ava listened to it twice. Admissibility might be tricky depending on state recording laws, she mused. But for obtaining a search warrant? For establishing probable cause of fraud? It is gold. She practically confesses to the forgery. But the most surprising piece of the puzzle was not a document or a recording. It was a person. Ethan Swanson, my half-brother, the son Lizette had brought into the marriage, the golden boy, the little king who had been given everything I was denied. I remembered him as a quiet, spoiled child who looked at me with wide, confused eyes while his mother dragged me out of the house. He was 25 now, working a token job at the firm. He reached out to me on social media. A single message. We need to talk. I know you are right. We met at a coffee shop near the university. He looked like Lizette, the same blonde hair, the same sharp nose, but his posture was Richard's. He looked defeated. I wanted to hate you, Ethan said, staring into his black coffee. Mom told me you were crazy. She said you were jealous because Dad loved me more. I grew up believing you were the villain in our story. And now? I asked. Now I see the books, Ethan said. I work in acquisitions. I started seeing these transfers to companies I had never heard of. Blue Heron, Obsidian. I asked Mom about them, and she told me to shut up. She told me I was too stupid to understand high finance. He laughed bitterly. She calls me her little king, but she thinks I am an idiot. But I remember things, Erica. He looked up at me, his eyes haunted. I remember the fireplace, he said. What fireplace? The one in the master bedroom, Ethan said. I was 10, a few months after you left. I woke up because of a nightmare and went to her room. Dad was asleep. Mom was sitting by the fire. She had the metal box, the old green safe from the closet. My breath hitched. That was my mother's personal safe, the one where she kept bonds, letters, and the original deed to the house. She was taking envelopes out, Ethan whispered. Thick ones. Some of them had your name on them. Some had your mom's name. She was throwing them into the fire, one by one, watching them burn. She looked happy. She was smiling while the paper turned to ash. She was destroying the evidence, I said. The original bonds, the trust documents that couldn't be digitally altered. She burned them. I never told anyone, Ethan said. I was scared, but when I heard about your car crash, Erica, she came home that night and she was shaking. She poured a drink and said, "Why won't she just die?" I realized then, she isn't protecting the family. She is protecting herself. Will you say that to the feds? I asked. Ethan took a deep breath. He looked at his hands, then at me. If it stops her, yes. Ava used Ethan's testimony to secure the crown jewel of our strategy. A federal search warrant for Swanson Hill Estate. The judge, presented with the affidavit of a family member alleging the destruction of evidence and the recording of the confession, signed the paper. We were going to raid the castle. But Lizette wasn't going down without a fight. The morning after my meeting with Ethan, the counterattack began. Lizette hired a crisis management firm from New York, sharks who specialized in burying scandals. The headlines were brutal. The Unhinged Daughter, Inside the Secret History of Erica Swanson. Sources reveal, estranged daughter demanded millions, threatened father. Is it justice or jeopardy? The dark past of the woman suing Baymont's beloved philanthropist. Social media was flooded with bots and paid trolls. They posted photos of me from college looking disheveled at a party. They dug up a parking ticket I got 10 years ago. They painted a picture of a lonely, bitter, childless woman obsessed with the past, while Lizette was the saintly caregiver nursing a sick husband. She is trying to try this in the court of public opinion before we get to a jury, Ava said, scrolling through the vitriol on Twitter. She wants to poison the jury pool. Then we fight back, I said. But not like her. We do not use mud. We use logic. I agreed to a single sit-down interview with a national news anchor. No soft lighting, no tears. I wore a sharp navy suit. I wore my glasses. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a forensic accountant. "Ms. Swanson?" the interviewer asked, leaning in. "Your stepmother claims you are motivated by greed and a childhood grudge. What is your response?" I looked directly into the camera lens. I imagined Lizette watching from her living room, glass of wine in hand. "I do not need my father's money," I said, my voice steady and cool. "I have a successful career investigating financial fraud. I have seen how people hide money. I have seen how they hide truth. This case is not about an inheritance. It is about a pattern of behavior. It is about forgery. It is about abuse. And it is about a woman who believes that if you have enough money, you can rewrite reality." "You claim you were pushed down the stairs," the interviewer pressed, "but the medical records say it was an accident." "Records can be altered," I said. "Witnesses can be bought. But math cannot be bribed. The money trail I have uncovered does not lie. The digital footprints do not lie. And when we present our evidence in court, the world will see that the accident was just the first step in a 20-year heist." The interview went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was cold. People started commenting on the precision of my language. The hashtag, "The math doesn't lie," started trending. The narrative shifted. I wasn't the hysterical daughter anymore. I was the professional who had come to audit the family books. The night before the raid, I stood in Ava's office. We had the map of the house on the wall. We had the warrant. We had the team. "We hit them at 6 in the morning, Ava said. "Ethan said the new safe is in the library, behind the false panel. That is where she keeps the active ledgers." "She will be asleep," I said. "She is never up before 9. "She will be awake tomorrow," Ava said grimly. I looked at the map. I looked at the room where I had been slapped, the stairs where I had fallen. The house that had been a mausoleum of my mother's memory was about to become a crime scene. "We are ready," I said. "Erica," Ava said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Once we go in, there is no turning back. If we do not find what we need, if she destroyed it all—" "She didn't," I said. "Narcissists never destroy everything. They keep trophies. She kept the journals. She kept the forged will. She thinks she is untouchable. That arrogance is where she hid the evidence." I turned to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Lizette was sleeping in my mother's bed, thinking she had won the PR war. She didn't know that the army was already at the gates. "Let's go get her," I said. The pieces were on the board. The trap was set. It was time for the endgame. The hearing room was a pressure cooker of wool suits, clicking cameras, and the heavy, suffocating scent of anticipation. The name Swanson had done its work. What started as a local legal skirmish had ballooned into a national spectacle. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters from every major outlet, locals who had followed the family gossip for decades, and the simply curious who wanted to see the fall of a dynasty. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped over a stack of files. My knuckles were white. Beside me, Ava Moreno was a statue of calm, arranging her pens with surgical precision. Across the aisle, Martin Sloan looked like he was preparing to order a scotch at the country club rather than defend a federal case. And Lizette. She sat next to my father, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the beleaguered matriarch to perfection. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Carver entered, his face unreadable. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked out over the circus. "We are on the record. Mr. Sloan, your opening statement." Martin Sloan stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked to the center of the room, commanding the space with the ease of a man who charged $800 an hour. "Your Honor," Sloan began, his voice rich and sympathetic, "we are here today because of a tragedy, but not the tragedy the plaintiff describes. The tragedy is the mind of Erica Swanson." He turned to look at me, his expression pitying. Erica was a 19-year-old girl devastated by the loss of her biological mother. She was unable to accept the new love in her father's life. She was volatile. She was angry. And like many people who cannot process their grief, she looked for a villain. She fell down the stairs that day because she was rushing, frantic, and wearing heels she could not walk in. But in her mind, a mind clouded by trauma and resentment, she rewrote that accident into an assault. She needs someone to blame, and for 15 years, she has targeted the one woman who tried to love her. It was a good speech. If I did not know the truth, I might have believed him. He wasn't painting me as a liar. He was painting me as broken. The defense calls Dr. Lawrence Arrington, Sloane said. I watched the psychiatrist walk to the stand. He was older now, balding, but he still wore the same expensive wire-rimmed glasses he had worn when he told my father I was delusional. Sloane walked him through his credentials, then pulled out the report from 15 years ago. Dr. Arrington, Sloane said, based on your evaluation of Erica Swanson shortly after the incident, what was your conclusion? Erica exhibited classic signs of persecution complex and memory distortion, Arrington said, his voice clinical and bored. She had a tendency to reinterpret neutral or accidental events as personal attacks. It is a defense mechanism. If she is the victim, she does not have to take responsibility for her own clumsiness or her failing grades. So, in your professional opinion, Sloane asked, is it possible she truly believes she was pushed, even if it never happened? It is highly probable, Arrington nodded. The human mind is a storytelling machine. She has spent 15 years telling herself this story. By now, it feels like truth to her. I felt the eyes of the jury, well, the bench trial equivalent, the judge, drifting toward me. I kept my face stone cold. Wait for it. Ava stood up for cross-examination. She didn't walk to the podium. She stood right at our table, holding a single sheet of paper. Dr. Arrington, Ava said clearly, you are the director of the Harborview Wellness Center, correct? I am, he replied. And your clinic relies heavily on philanthropic donations to operate? We do have generous donors, yes. Is the Lizette Swanson Benevolence Fund one of those donors? Ava asked. Arrington shifted in his seat. They have contributed, yes. Let's be specific, Ava said, walking forward now. Did the Swanson Fund donate $50,000 to your clinic on September 12, 2005? I would have to check my records. I have the records here, Ava said, holding up the sheet. $50,000, cleared 2 days before you wrote the report diagnosing Erica with a persecution complex, and another $50,000 the following year, and another the year after that. In total, your clinic has received $300,000 from the defendant's charity. The room went silent. Arrington looked at Martin Sloane, who was studying his fingernails. My professional opinion is not for sale. Arrington bristled, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. Of course not, Ava said dryly. It just seems that your opinion happens to align perfectly with the woman writing the checks. No further questions. Judge Carver made a note on his pad, his brow furrowed. Next up was Lizette. She floated to the stand. That was the only word for it. She moved with a grace that made her seem fragile, ethereal. She swore the oath with a soft, trembling voice. Sloane led her gently through the story. She talked about how hard she tried to bond with me. She talked about the stress I caused Richard. And then, the day of the fall. I heard her running, Lizette said, looking at the judge with wide, earnest eyes. I yelled, Erica, slow down. But she was so angry. She had been arguing about her passport. She spun around on the landing, and those heels, they just slid. I reached out to catch her. I tried so hard to catch her, but she was gone. She dabbed a tear. It was the most horrifying moment of my life, and then, to have her accuse me, it broke my heart. Ava's turn. She walked up to the witness stand and stood close. Mrs. Swanson, you say you reached out to catch her. Yes, Lizette whispered. So you admit your hands were on her? I tried to grab her arm to steady her. In the foyer, while Erica was bleeding on the floor, did you tell her father that she slipped? I did, because that is what happened. Did you push her? Ava asked. The question was a hammer blow. Lizette recoiled, pressing a hand to her chest as if she had been physically struck. Absolutely not. I have never raised a hand to anyone in my life. The idea is offensive. I am a mother. You are a stepmother, Ava corrected. And we will see what kind. Sloane called his next witness, Ethan Swanson. My brother looked terrified. He walked to the stand, avoiding my eyes. He looked at his mother, who gave him a tight, encouraging nod. Ethan, Sloane said, you lived in the house. Did you ever see your mother be violent? No, Ethan said. His voice was quiet. And regarding the fall, what do you know about it? I was told Erica fell, Ethan said. I was told she was running and she tripped. Did Erica ever tell you she was pushed? She left right after. We didn't talk much. Ava stood up. Ethan, how old were you when this happened? I was 5, he said. So you did not see the fall yourself? No. Everything you know about that day, the heels, the running, the accident. Who told you that story? Ethan paused. He looked at Lizette. For a second, I saw the conflict in his face. He remembered the fire. He remembered the burning envelopes. My mother told me, Ethan said, and my father. So your testimony is entirely based on what the defendant told you? Yes, Ethan said. Thank you, Ava said. She looked at the judge. Hearsay, Your Honor. Judge Carver nodded. Sustained. Then came the moment we had gambled everything on. The plaintiff calls Miles Avery, Ava announced. A ripple of confusion went through the courtroom. The press didn't know who he was. But Lizette knew. Her head snapped toward the double doors. Miles walked in. He looked older than his years, his suit loose on his frame, but he walked with a dignity I hadn't seen in the motel. He carried his hat in his hand. He walked past the defense table and didn't look at Lizette, though her eyes were drilling holes into him. He took the stand. He swore the oath. Mr. Avery? Ava asked. Where were you on August 28th, 2005? I was in the foyer of Swanson Hill Estate, Miles said. His voice shook slightly, then steadied. I was polishing the silver service on the sideboard. What did you see? I heard shouting, Miles said. Miss Erica and Mrs. Swanson were arguing in the upstairs hallway. Near the study, I looked up. I saw Mrs. Swanson pursue Miss Erica out of the room. And then? The room was dead silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Miss Erica turned around near the stairs, Miles said. Mrs. Swanson grabbed her. Miss Erica pulled away, and then Mrs. Swanson stepped forward. She placed both hands on Miss Erica's shoulders, and she shoved her. A collective gasp went through the room. Lizette shook her head violently, whispering something to Sloane. Are you sure it wasn't a stumble? Ava asked. Could she have been trying to catch her? No, Miles said firmly. You do not catch someone by thrusting your arms forward. It was a push. I heard the impact. I saw Miss Erica hit the railing and go over backward. What did you do? I ran to her, Miles said, his voice cracking. She was bleeding from the head. She looked at me. She asked for help. And then Mrs. Swanson came down and she started screaming that it was an accident. She looked at me. She gave me a look that said I was to remain silent. And you did, Ava said softly. I did. Miles wept openly now. I was afraid. I needed my job. I failed that child. It was powerful. It was human. Then Martin Sloane stood up. He didn't look rattled. He looked like he had a card up his sleeve. Mr. Avery, Sloane said, smiling tightly. You were fired from the Swanson estate, were you not? I retired, Miles said. Retired? Sloane picked up a piece of paper. I have here a disciplinary record from the Swanson household employment files, dated September 1st, 2005. It states you were terminated for cause, specifically, for the theft of 3 silver place settings and a bottle of vintage cognac. That is a lie, Miles shouted, standing up. I never stole a thing in my life. It says here you were caught with the items in your bag. Sloane continued, ignoring him. Is it not true, Mr. Avery, that you harbor a grudge against Mrs. Swanson because she fired you for being a thief? Is this testimony not just your way of getting back at her? Miles looked around wildly. No, she paid me to leave. She gave me cash.
Cash? Sloan raised an eyebrow. Do you have a record of this cash? A bank deposit? No, I spent it on my wife's care.
So no proof of payment, but we have a record of theft. Sloan threw the paper on the table. No further questions. Miles looked destroyed. He slumped in the chair, looking at me with desperate, apologetic eyes. The gallery was buzzing. Sloan had neutralized him. Ava stood up. She walked over to our laptop and plugged in a cable connecting to the courtroom's main screen.
Your Honor, Ava said. Redirect.
Proceed, Judge Carver said. Mr. Sloan just introduced a document, Defense Exhibit D, claiming it is a disciplinary record from 2005. Ava said, Fortunately, during the discovery phase of the federal investigation, we obtained a forensic image of the Swanson Estate's home server. She tapped a key. A file directory appeared on the large screen. This is the metadata for the file Mr. Sloan just presented, Ava said. The screen zoomed in on the file properties. File name, Avery Termination Record. Doc date created, October 14, 2019. Author, L. Swanson. This document, Ava said, her voice ringing out like a bell, was not created in 2005. It was created 4 years ago, on a computer registered to Lizette Swanson, 3 days after Erica Swanson first contacted her father's lawyers about the trust. She turned to Sloan. The document is a forgery. Mr. Sloan, just like the will. It was fabricated specifically to discredit this witness in case he ever resurfaced. Martin Sloan froze. He looked at the document in his hand, then at Lizette. Lizette's face was a mask of pure horror. She had been caught, not in the past, but in the present cover-up. And regarding the events of that day, Ava continued, relentless. Mr. Avery may not have bank records, but he kept something else. She clicked the next file. The video from the hospital hallway played on the massive screen. It was grainy, shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. She said you pushed her, Lizette. Richard's voice echoed in the courtroom. She is concussed, Lizette's voice shrieked. We stick to the truth. Tell the doctor it was an accident, or I walk out of here and I take the investors with me. The video played on a loop. Take the investors with me. Take the investors with me. Lizette Swanson, the philanthropist, the loving wife, was exposed as a blackmailer. Judge Carver leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen. He looked from the video to Lizette, who was now gripping the table so hard her knuckles were purple. This court, Judge Carver said, his voice low and dangerous, takes a very dim view of witness tampering and an even dimmer view of submitting forged evidence to a bench trial. He looked at Martin Sloan. Mr. Sloan, I suggest you review your files very carefully before tomorrow morning. I will not have my courtroom turned into a theater of fiction. We reserve the right to authenticate the metadata. Sloan stammered, but he was deflating before our eyes. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Carver banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. The room erupted. Reporters were sprinting for the doors. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my spirit was soaring. I looked at Miles, who was still sitting in the witness box, looking stunned. I nodded to him. We did it. As the bailiffs moved to clear the room, Martin Sloan leaned over to Lizette. He was whispering furiously, likely telling her that she had perjured herself and that the forged disciplinary record might get him disbarred. But Lizette wasn't listening to him. She was looking at me. Her eyes were not fearful anymore. They were dead, empty. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. Sloan packed his briefcase and walked past us. He paused for a second, looking at Ava. You do not have a video of the push, he said, clutching at straws. You have a video of an argument. You have a forged employment record. Bad, yes, but you still cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she pushed her. It is still he said she said on the stairs. Ava smiled. It was a shark smile. Get some sleep, Martin, she said. You are going to need it. I watched them leave. The first day was ours. We had ripped the mask off. We had proven she was a liar and a forger. But Sloane was right about one thing. We still needed the final link. We needed to prove the assault itself, not just the cover-up. I looked at Ava. Ready for the library? We have the warrant, Ava said. The agents are entering the house right now. If the camera hard drive is there, tomorrow ends her. I walked out of the courtroom into the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras. I didn't hide my face. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to know that the girl who fell down the stairs had just climbed back up, and she was bringing the whole house down with her. The hallway outside courtroom 4B looked less like a legal proceeding and more like a riot. The rumors had started circulating late last night, whispers about a raid, a safe, and a hard drive that had survived 2 decades of darkness. By the time I arrived at 8 in the morning, the press corps had doubled. They sensed blood in the water. I walked through the crowd, flanked by federal agents. I did not look down. I did not hide. I wore a suit of sharp, slate gray, and I wore my scar like a medal. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Martin Sloane sat at the defense table, looking like a man who had not slept in a week. His tie was slightly askew. His confidence evaporated. Beside him, Lizette was rigid. Her face was pale, her makeup applied with a heavy hand to cover the sleeplessness, but her eyes were darting around the room, scanning for exits that did not exist. "All rise," the bailiff boomed. Judge Carver took the bench. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He looked at Ava. "Ms. Moreno, you indicated you have new evidence resulting from yesterday's federal warrant execution?"
We do, Your Honor, Ava said. Her voice was calm, the deadly calm of a sniper who has already lined up the shot. The prosecution calls Dr. Eris Thorne, lead forensic data specialist for the FBI.
Dr. Thorne was a young man with intense eyes and a demeanor that suggested he preferred computers to people. He took the stand, swearing the oath quickly. "Dr. Thorne," Ava began, plugging her laptop into the courtroom's presentation system. "Please describe what was recovered from the library safe at Swanson Hill Estate yesterday morning." "We recovered several physical ledgers, a passport belonging to the defendant, and an external hard drive unit from a Sentier home security system, model year 2004, Thorne stated. "And where was this system installed?" "According to the blueprints we recovered, the camera units were installed in the second-floor hallway and the master study," Thorne explained. "They were hardwired. The system was listed as disconnected in 2006, but the local storage drive was never wiped. It was simply unplugged and stored in the back of the safe." I felt a pang in my chest. My mother. She had installed that system 6 months before she died because she had been paranoid about break-ins. Lizette must have thought she had disabled it, but she had only turned off the live feed. The memory had survived. "Please play Exhibit G," Ava said. The massive screen on the wall flickered to life. The timestamp read, August 28, 2005, 14:12 p.m. The angle was high. Looking down the hallway outside the glass-walled study, it was black and white, grainy by modern standards, but the figures were unmistakable. I saw myself, 19 years old, ponytail swinging, arms gesticulating. I looked so young. I was backing out of the study, holding the folder, the scholarship evidence. Then Lizette appeared in the frame. The courtroom went deadly silent. On the screen, Lizette wasn't the poised socialite sitting at the defense table. She was a blur of rage. She lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. I saw the pixelated version of myself try to pull away. I saw Lizette yank me back, hard, her body weight throwing me off balance. We wrestled for a second in the doorway. Then, the audio kicked in. It was muffled, but distinct. "You are not ruining this for me," Lizette's voice shrieked through the courtroom speakers. In the video, I stumbled back toward the stairs. The camera angle did not cover the staircase itself. It cut off right at the banister, but what it showed next was enough. Lizette stepped to the edge of the frame. She raised both arms, palms out, in a shoving motion. Then, she disappeared off screen, following the momentum of the push. A split second later, a sickening sound filled the room. Thud, crack, thud. And then, a scream. My scream. It was a high, terrified sound that raised the hair on my arms even now. 15 years later. But the video did not end there. This was the part that made the jury gasp. For 10 seconds, while I was screaming in agony at the bottom of the stairs, Lizette stood at the top of the landing, back in the camera frame. She did not run down immediately. She stopped. She smoothed her hair. She adjusted the collar of her silk blouse. She took a deep breath, composing her face into a mask of panic. Only then did she run down the stairs, screaming, "Richard, help!" Ava froze the frame on Lizette, adjusting her hair. "She fixed her hair," Ava said into the silence. While her stepdaughter lay with a broken skull and shattered ribs, Lizette Swanson took 3 seconds to check her appearance. Lizette let out a strangled sob from the defense table. "I was in shock. That is a shock reaction." "That is a predator's reaction," Ava corrected coldly. Judge Carver looked at the screen, then at Lizette. His expression was one of profound disgust. "This court finds the chain of evidence complete. We have the motive established by the financial records. We have the mechanism established by the video, and we have the consciousness of guilt established by the delay." "We are not done, Your Honor," Ava said. "We have one final witness regarding the cover-up." She turned to the back of the room. "The prosecution calls Richard Swanson." My father stood up. He looked like a ghost. He walked to the witness stand with a slow, shuffling gait, leaning heavily on a cane I had never seen him use before. He didn't look at Lizette. He looked at me. He took the oath. "Mr. Swanson," Ava said gently, "did you write a letter to your attorney, Mr. Henderson, in 2019? "I did," Richard said. His voice was a rasp. "We found this letter in the safe," Ava said, holding up a handwritten page. "It was never mailed. Would you please read the highlighted paragraph?" Richard took the paper. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. He put on his reading glasses, the ones Sarah the nurse said he was never allowed to wear when signing checks. "I have doubts," Richard read, his voice cracking. "I have always had doubts, the way she fell, the way Lizette looked that day, but I am afraid. I am afraid that if I ask questions, the fragile peace we have built will shatter. Lizette holds the keys to everything now, my reputation, my company, my home. If I turn against her, I lose it all. So I choose to believe the lie, because the truth is too expensive." He lowered the paper. Tears were streaming down his face. "Mr. Swanson?" Ava asked. "Did you believe Erica fell by accident?" "In the beginning, I wanted to," Richard whispered. "But deep down, no, I knew Erica. She was athletic. She was graceful. But Lizette was so convincing, and she told me that if the police got involved, the investors would pull out. She told me Erica was mentally ill. She made it easier to abandon my daughter than to face my wife." He turned to me. For the first time in 15 years, he really saw me. "Erica," he said, and the name broke in his throat. "I chose silence to keep the image of a perfect family. I sacrificed you to save my own comfort, and that is the greatest sin I committed against you. It wasn't just her push, it was my silence." "Objection!" Martin Sloan stood up, but his heart wasn't in it. "This is prejudicial." "It is the truth," Lizette screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair back. The mask had finally, completely shattered. Her face was twisted into a rictus of pure venom. "You weak, pathetic old man," she yelled at Richard. "I saved you. I saved your company. You were driving it into the ground with your sentimentality. I did the work. I managed the accounts. I made the hard decisions while you sat in your library drinking scotch." The courtroom froze. "You managed the accounts?" Ava asked quickly, turning to face her. "So you admit you were the one controlling the transfers to the shell companies? You admit you were the active manager of the assets you claimed to know nothing about?" Lizette stopped. Her eyes went wide. She realized what she had just done. In her arrogance, in her need to claim credit for her genius, she had just confessed to the financial fraud. Lizette looked around. She saw Martin Sloane put his head in his hands. She saw the judge writing furiously. "Sit down, Mrs. Swanson," Judge Carver ordered, "or I will have you restrained." Lizette sank back into her chair, defeated. Ava had one last slide. "To finalize the record," Ava said, "we have the report from the forensic document examiner regarding the last will and testament of Richard Swanson." The screen changed to show two signatures overlaid in blue and red. They matched perfectly. "This is a digital lift," Ava explained. "The signature on the will, the one disinheriting Erica, was copied from a lease agreement signed in 2010. It is a forgery. Erica Swanson never signed away her rights. She never agreed to be silenced." "The prosecution rests," Ava said. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and final. Judge Carver took a sip of water. He adjusted his robes. He looked at the defense table. "Mr. Sloane," the judge said, "do you have any closing arguments?" Martin Sloane stood up slowly. He looked at the video freeze frame of Lizette fixing her hair. He looked at the weeping father. He looked at the metadata. "The defense rests, Your Honor," Sloane said quietly. Judge Carver nodded. He didn't need to recess. He didn't need to deliberate. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented," Judge Carver began, his voice booming through the room, "this court finds that the plaintiff, Erica Swanson, has met the burden of proof for all civil claims. However," he continued, "the evidence presented goes far beyond civil liability. I am referring the following matters to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal prosecution against Lizette Swanson: aggravated assault, witness tampering, wire fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. I am issuing an immediate freezing order on all assets held by Lizette Swanson, the Swanson Benevolence Fund, and all affiliated entities listed in the prosecution's exhibit. A court-appointed trustee will take over the management of Swanson Holdings effective immediately to prevent further dissipation of assets." He looked at Richard. "Mr. Swanson, I am invalidating the current will and power of attorney. You will be placed under temporary protective guardianship until a medical evaluation determines your capacity." Finally, he looked at me. "Ms. Swanson," Judge Carver said, and his expression softened. "The court declares the previous legal filings against you, specifically the psychiatric evaluations and the waivers of inheritance, to be null and void, as they were products of fraud and coercion. You are restored to your rightful legal standing as the heir to the Eleanor Swanson Trust." He banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." Pandemonium erupted. Federal agents moved toward the defense table. I watched as they asked Lizette to stand. She didn't scream this time. She looked numb. She held her wrists out as they clicked the handcuffs on her, the cold, steel bracelets that matched her soul. As they led her away, she didn't look at my father. She didn't look at the press. She looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes held fear. I stood up. I felt light, weightless. Ava turned to me and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on her face. "We got her." "We got her," I echoed. We walked out of the courtroom together. The hallway was a wall of flashbulbs. Reporters were shouting questions. Erica, how does it feel to win?" "Do you forgive your father?" "What will you do with the money?" I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. The microphones were thrust into my face. I looked at the cameras. "This was never about winning," I said, my voice clear and steady. "And it wasn't about the money, for 15 years. A lie was written down in police reports, in medical files, and in the minds of this town. Today we didn't just win a lawsuit, we corrected the record. Today the truth was finally written down." I pushed through the crowd, signaling that I was done. At the bottom of the steps, standing by a pillar, was Miles Avery. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. He held his old fedora in his hands. "You did it, Miss Erica," he said softly. "No," I said. taking his rough hand in mine. "We did it. You saved me. Miles, you came back." "I should have spoken sooner," he said, shaking his head. "I let you suffer." "You spoke when it mattered," I said. "You gave me the weapon I needed. Go home to the ocean. Miles, you are safe now. She can never hurt you again." He squeezed my hand, tears shimmering in his eyes, and then turned to walk away. A free man. I stood alone for a moment at the base of the stairs. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, cutting through the Baymont fog. I reached up and touched the scar on my left temple. For years, every time I touched it, I felt shame. I felt the phantom sensation of falling. I felt the humiliation of being called crazy. But today, under the bright, uncompromising light of the sun, it felt different. It felt like tough, knit skin. It felt like armor. It was no longer the mark of a victim who fell. It was the mark of a survivor who climbed back up. I took a deep breath, smelling the salt air from the harbor, and walked toward my car. The file was closed, the ledger was balanced, and finally, Erica Swanson was free. Thank you so much for listening to Erica's story. It has been a long journey from that dark staircase to the steps of the courthouse, and I am so glad you were here to witness the truth come out. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, please comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories for more intense drama. Hit that like button if you cheered for Erica, and smash that hype button to help this video get discovered by more people. Your support means the world to us. Until next time.